Liberation, within a Stoic framework, is not achieved by rearranging the external architecture of life, but by restructuring the internal interpretation through which life is perceived. This distinction is foundational. Most individuals instinctively attempt to reduce suffering by altering circumstances, seeking better conditions, more favorable relationships, or greater security. Yet Stoicism asserts a more demanding but ultimately more stable proposition: that suffering does not inherently reside in events themselves, but in the judgments we attach to them. Therefore, liberation is not a change in environment, but a recalibration of perception. From this perspective, suffering ceases to be an obstacle and becomes instead a form of raw material. It is not an interruption to the formation of identity, but the very substance from which a durable identity is constructed. Pressure, loss, betrayal, these are not anomalies in the human experience. They are structural forces. When properly engaged, they do not weaken the individual, but compress and refine the self into something more resilient, more coherent, and less dependent on external validation. The Stoic does not ask how to avoid hardship, but how to metabolize it. This leads to the fundamental Stoic dichotomy, the separation between what is within one's control and what is not. Within control lie perception, judgment, intention, and action. Outside of control lie outcomes, other people's behavior, reputation, fortune, and fate. This division is not merely philosophical, it is operational. It determines where effort should be invested and where acceptance must be cultivated. Emotional disturbance arises precisely when this boundary is violated, when one attempts to control what is inherently uncontrollable, or neglects responsibility over what is fully within one's domain. From here, even the concept of tragedy must be redefined. What is commonly labeled as tragedy is, under Stoic analysis, a neutral sequence of events combined with a subjective interpretation. The event itself carries no intrinsic emotional charge. It is the narrative imposed upon it that generates suffering. This does not deny pain, it reclassifies its origin. Pain may be inevitable, but prolonged suffering is often a function of interpretation rather than circumstance. To ground this framework in a concrete narrative, the figure of Joseph serves as a precise model. He is not to be understood as an inherently exceptional individual, nor as a figure sustained by miraculous exemption from adversity. Rather, he represents the outcome of sustained exposure to pressure, instability, and loss, combined with an unusual consistency in internal regulation. His development is not the result of sudden transformation, but of gradual cognitive discipline. His journey is not a sequence of fortunate reversals, but a prolonged process of perceptual refinement. In this sense, Joseph is not a hero by origin, but a system shaped under stress. The descent begins with betrayal, but even here, Stoic interpretation demands precision. Betrayal is typically experienced as a violation of identity, as if the act itself has the power to diminish or redefine the self. However, under Stoic scrutiny, betrayal is reclassified as an external event, severe, consequential, but ultimately not determinative of one's inner structure. It does not destroy identity. It reveals the instability of the identity that was previously assumed. In Joseph's case, betrayal does not simply remove him from a position of favor, it dismantles the illusion upon which that position was built. As a favored son, his sense of self was partially anchored in external validation, paternal preference, familial hierarchy, and the implicit security of belonging. When he is sold into slavery, what collapses is not his essence, but the constructed narrative of who he believed himself to be. The preferred self is exposed as contingent, fragile, and ultimately unsustainable. This moment marks the critical transition from victimhood to observation. Initially, the loss is absolute. Status is erased, autonomy is removed, and identity is externally redefined, from son to property. Yet the decisive factor lies not in the magnitude of loss, but in Joseph's refusal to equate his internal identity with his external condition. This is the Stoic maneuver, the separation of self from what happens to the self. Without this distinction, suffering becomes totalizing. With it, suffering becomes containable. To adopt the position of the observer is not to deny pain, but to contextualize it. It allows for the recognition that while events can constrain action, they do not have direct access to judgment unless permitted. Joseph's transformation begins at the point where he ceases to interpret his circumstances as a definition of his worth. He does not immediately escape his condition, but he prevents it from colonizing his internal framework. The pit into which he is cast can thus be reinterpreted not merely as a site of abandonment, but as a form of cognitive isolation. Deprived of sensory richness, social affirmation, and predictable structure, he is forced into a state where external distractions are minimized. There is no control, no visible future, no reassurance. Under ordinary conditions, such deprivation would produce psychological collapse. However, within a Stoic lens, it becomes an unintended training environment. This environment functions as a kind of sensory deprivation chamber for the mind, where external noise is stripped away and internal processes become more pronounced. In the absence of control over circumstances, the only remaining domain is internal regulation. It is here that the concept of an internal locus of control becomes not theoretical, but necessary. If meaning is to be preserved, it must be generated internally. If stability is to exist, it must be self-produced. Thus, the abyss is not merely a fall, it is a compression phase. It removes excess identity, strips away illusions, and forces a confrontation with the bare structure of the self. What emerges from this phase is not yet strength, but clarity. The recognition that while one may not control the trajectory of events, one retains sovereignty over interpretation. And within that narrow but absolute domain, the foundation of resilience is laid. Emerging from the psychological compression of the abyss, Joseph does not re-enter a world of freedom, but a system of constraint structured around labor, hierarchy, and surveillance. Yet it is precisely within this constrained environment that a second phase of transformation begins, not through reflection alone, but through disciplined action. If the pit stripped away illusion, the household of Potiphar becomes the site where structure is rebuilt through behavior. This is not a return to identity as it was before, but the construction of a new identity grounded in function rather than status. Joseph's transition from slave to overseer is not the result of external favor alone, but of operational consistency. The principle at work is distinctly Stoic. Excellence is not contingent upon position. Whether one occupies the highest rank or the lowest, the standard of execution remains invariant. This principle is counterintuitive in a status-driven framework where effort is often calibrated according to reward. Joseph, however, decouples performance from recognition. His work is not an expression of circumstance, but of internal order. This manifests in the granular domain of daily action. Tasks that might otherwise be dismissed as trivial are treated with the same level of precision as those of visible importance. This is the Stoic discipline of scale invariance, to perform small actions as if they carry structural weight. Precision becomes habitual, not situational. Consistency replaces fluctuation. Over time, this generates a form of credibility that is not declared but observed, an emergent property of repeated reliability. Through this process, Joseph develops two critical capacities: administrative competence and reputational capital. The former is technical, the ability to organize, allocate, and oversee resources. The latter is perceptual, the trust others place in his judgment based on observed outcomes. Importantly, neither of these is granted. Both are accumulated through sustained execution. In Stoic terms, this is the external manifestation of internal order. The alignment between intention and action produces measurable stability in the environment. However, the most significant test within this phase is not logistical, but ethical. The encounter with Potiphar's wife introduces a conflict that cannot be resolved through skill alone. It is a confrontation between competing temporal horizons, immediate gratification versus long-term integrity. The proposition is simple but destabilizing. Exchange a moment of pleasure for a potential collapse of character. The stakes are asymmetrical. The reward is immediate and tangible. The cost is deferred and abstract. Joseph's refusal is not merely an act of obedience, but an assertion of internal hierarchy. Within the Stoic framework, impulses are not eliminated, but subordinated. Desire is acknowledged, but not obeyed. This is the essence of self-mastery, the capacity to experience inclination without capitulation. In rejecting the offer, Joseph affirms that internal coherence outweighs external advantage. He chooses alignment over comfort, continuity over disruption. This decision also reflects a deeper valuation system. Honor, in this context, is not a social construct dependent on recognition, but an internal metric of consistency between values and actions. External benefits, status, pleasure, advancement, are reclassified as secondary. They may be pursued, but not at the cost of structural integrity. In this sense, Joseph's refusal is not a loss, but a reinforcement of the internal architecture he is constructing. The consequence, however, is not reward, but regression. He is falsely accused and subsequently imprisoned. From a non-Stoic perspective, this would invalidate the entire framework. What is the utility of virtue if it leads to suffering? Yet within the Stoic model, the outcome does not negate the value of the action. The metric is not external success, but internal alignment. Joseph retains coherence, even as his circumstances deteriorate. What emerges from this phase is the formation of what can be described as a fortress of character. This is not a metaphorical embellishment, but a structural reality. Through disciplined labor and ethical consistency, Joseph has constructed a system within himself that is resistant to external volatility. Competence and integrity, when combined, form a stable base upon which future authority can be exercised. This is the concept of character as infrastructure, an underlying framework that supports complex functions without visible strain. The transition into prison represents not merely a change in location, but a reconfiguration of constraints. If Potiphar's house was a structured system with defined roles and rewards, the prison is a domain of near total deprivation. Freedom is removed, status is nullified, and social connections are severed. What remains is an environment characterized by uncertainty, monotony, and enforced limitation. Under such conditions, the individual is stripped not only of agency, but of feedback, the mechanisms through which effort is typically validated. Yet it is precisely within this environment that the next layer of Stoic discipline is activated. Deprivation eliminates distraction, forcing a concentration of cognitive resources. Without the possibility of altering external conditions, attention is redirected inward, not in abstraction, but in application. Joseph does not retreat into passivity. He continues to operate, to observe, to engage. The absence of freedom does not produce inactivity, but a recalibration of available actions. His interactions with the cupbearer and the baker illustrate this principle. These encounters are not random events that he passively experiences, but situations he actively interprets. He listens, analyzes, and responds with precision. This is not intuition in the mystical sense, but a form of situational intelligence, an ability to extract patterns from limited data. In an environment where information is scarce, the value of accurate interpretation increases exponentially. What appears externally as coincidence is internally structured as readiness. Joseph has trained his perception to remain active even in constrained conditions. He does not rely on opportunity. he prepares for it. When interaction occurs, he is equipped to engage meaningfully. This is a critical Stoic principle. One cannot control when events arise, but one can control the state of preparedness when they do. However, the most severe test within the prison is not interaction, but duration. After correctly interpreting the cupbearer's dream, Joseph is promised remembrance, an exit from obscurity. Yet this promise is not fulfilled. 2 years pass without acknowledgement, without progress, without change. This period introduces a different form of pressure, temporal erosion. It is not acute suffering, but prolonged stagnation. In such conditions, the primary threat is not external harm, but internal degradation. Without reinforcement, purpose begins to dissolve. Without recognition, effort appears futile. The mind seeks validation to sustain direction. In its absence, it tends toward resignation. The Stoic response, however, is to decouple purpose from feedback. Joseph does not abandon his internal orientation simply because it is not externally confirmed. This is the advanced stage of Stoic endurance, the ability to maintain alignment without evidence of progress. It requires a redefinition of purpose, not as a path toward reward, but as a mode of being. Action is not performed for outcome, but for consistency. Time ceases to be a metric of success and becomes instead a medium through which stability is tested. Crucially, Joseph does not allow delay or injustice to corrupt his internal system. He does not become erratic, bitter, or disengaged. The discipline established in earlier phases remains intact. His thinking remains structured, his behavior consistent. This continuity under pressure is what differentiates resilience from mere survival. Survival endures, resilience maintains form. Thus, the prison is not a regression, but a refinement. It removes residual dependencies on recognition, reward, and progression. What remains is a self-sustaining system, capable of operating in the absence of external support. In Stoic terms, this represents a near-complete internalization of control. The environment has been reduced to its most restrictive form, yet the individual continues to function with clarity and discipline. And in that sustained coherence, the final preparation for authority is completed. The transition from imprisonment to authority does not occur as an interruption of Joseph's trajectory, but as its logical continuation. What appears, from an external vantage point, as a sudden elevation is, under closer inspection, the release of accumulated capacity. Pharaoh's selection is not an act of arbitrary favor, nor a concession to chance. It is a recognition, implicit but precise, of a system that has already been tested under extreme conditions. Joseph does not rise because he is fortunate. He rises because he has become structurally reliable. Every prior phase, betrayal, servitude, false accusation, isolation, has contributed to the development of a specific competency set. These are not abstract virtues, but operational traits: clarity under pressure, consistency without supervision, judgment in ambiguity, and discipline in deprivation. When Pharaoh encounters Joseph, he is not encountering potential, he is encountering a fully formed decision-making apparatus. The crisis of famine requires not inspiration, but execution, and execution requires a mind that has already been calibrated through constraint. Central to Joseph's effectiveness in this new role is what can be described as a logistical mindset. Unlike reactive leadership, which responds to immediate stimuli, logistical thinking operates across temporal layers. It anticipates, accumulates, allocates, and preserves. Faced with the impending famine, Joseph does not propose symbolic solutions, he constructs a system. The process is methodical. During years of abundance, resources are not consumed at maximum capacity, but strategically reserved. Storage is organized, distribution channels are established, and contingencies are calculated. This approach reflects a fundamental Stoic principle. Preparation is the rational response to uncertainty. Rather than attempting to eliminate future risk, a futile endeavor, Joseph absorbs it into a structured plan. The abundance is not misinterpreted as permanence, nor is scarcity treated as anomaly. Both are integrated into a unified model of fluctuation. This capacity to think in cycles rather than moments distinguishes strategic leadership from impulsive reaction. Crucially, Joseph's past suffering is not discarded as irrelevant once power is attained. It is repurposed as data. The deprivation he experienced is not merely remembered, it is operationalized. Having endured lack, he understands its mechanics, its psychological effects, its behavioral consequences, its capacity to destabilize populations. This insight allows him to design systems not only for efficiency, but for resilience. In this sense, hardship becomes a form of experiential intelligence, information that cannot be simulated, only lived. However, the execution of such a system requires a form of emotional detachment that is often misunderstood. Leadership at this scale cannot be governed by fluctuating sentiment. Decisions must be made not on the basis of individual preference but collective survival. This introduces a necessary coldness, not cruelty, but clarity. Resources must be allocated according to need and sustainability, not sympathy. The well-being of the entire population supersedes the emotional impulses directed toward any single case. This prioritization reflects a Stoic hierarchy of value, the preservation of structure over the appeasement of feeling. Joseph's decisions are not devoid of care, but they are insulated from volatility. He does not allow immediate emotional pressure to override long-term stability. This is not an absence of humanity, but a disciplined containment of it. Without such containment, the system would fragment under the weight of inconsistent judgment. By this stage, the psychological transformations initiated in earlier phases have reached functional maturity. The scars of Joseph's past, betrayal, humiliation, abandonment, no longer operate as sources of instability. They have been metabolized into protective layers. He no longer exhibits the reactive patterns associated with wounded identity, defensiveness, the need for validation, the impulse toward retaliation. These have been replaced by a stable internal configuration, emotional equilibrium, cognitive clarity, and sustained tolerance for pressure. The absence of egoic fragility is particularly significant. Joseph does not require recognition to maintain direction. His authority is not performative, it is structural. Because he is not dependent on affirmation, he is not vulnerable to its withdrawal. This independence allows him to operate within high-stakes environments without distortion. Praise does not inflate him. Criticism does not destabilize him. He remains aligned with function. The final phase of Joseph's development is not defined by external achievement, but by internal resolution. The encounter with his brothers reintroduces the original source of disruption, not as memory, but as living reality. These are not abstract figures, they are the agents of his initial descent. The emotional charge embedded in this moment is substantial. For the first time since his rise, Joseph is positioned not as a subject of events, but as their controller. The asymmetry is complete. Those who once exercised power over him now stand vulnerable before him. Within this configuration lies the potential for retribution. The structural conditions for revenge are fully satisfied: authority, opportunity, and justification. From a conventional perspective, retaliation would be both understandable and defensible. Yet it is precisely here that the depth of Joseph's Stoic transformation is revealed. The question is no longer what he can do, but what he chooses to do. Joseph's decision not to pursue revenge is not an act of passive forgiveness, nor a denial of past harm. It is a recalibration of value. He evaluates the situation not through the lens of personal grievance, but through a broader structural perspective. The suffering he endured is not isolated. It is embedded within a larger sequence of events, that has led to his current position. To respond with vengeance would be to prioritize emotional resolution over systemic coherence. Instead, he chooses alignment with a higher order purpose. This purpose is not abstract morality, but functional continuity. The preservation of his family, the stabilization of resources, the maintenance of social order, these objectives supersede the satisfaction of individual emotion. In Stoic terms, this represents the subordination of impulse to reason, not through suppression, but through reorientation. This reorientation extends to Joseph's relationship with memory itself. He does not attempt to erase the past, nor to reinterpret it as harmless. The events remain as they were, severe, unjust, formative. However, their meaning is transformed. Rather than viewing them as isolated acts of harm, he integrates them into a coherent narrative of development. The betrayal becomes a necessary condition for displacement. Displacement becomes a condition for exposure. Exposure becomes a condition for growth. Growth becomes a condition for authority. This does not imply that suffering was desirable, but that it has been rendered functional. The past is no longer a source of fragmentation, but a component of structure. By reinterpreting his experiences in this way, Joseph achieves a form of cognitive closure, not by resolving each event individually, but by situating them within a unified system. The act of revealing himself to his brothers, therefore, is not merely a narrative climax, but a demonstration of completed integration. There is no residual instability in his response, no oscillation between anger and restraint. His emotional state is consistent with his structural development. He neither denies the past nor is governed by it. He operates from a position in which memory informs action without dictating it. In this final configuration, Joseph embodies the endpoint of the Stoic process outlined from the beginning, a state in which external events, regardless of intensity, do not compromise internal order. His identity is no longer contingent upon circumstance, recognition, or history. It is self-sustaining, coherent, and aligned with reason. And it is precisely this alignment that allows him to exercise power without distortion, to engage the past without collapse, and to move forward without fragmentation. When the entire trajectory is examined as a unified system rather than a sequence of disconnected events, a clear structural pattern emerges: betrayal, discipline, isolation, power, and ultimately forgiveness. These are not merely narrative phases, they function as interlocking modules in the construction of a resilient human architecture. Each stage contributes a specific capability. Betrayal dismantles illusion. Discipline establishes operational consistency. Isolation removes dependency. Power tests stability under scale. Forgiveness resolves internal fragmentation. Together, they form a closed loop of development, one that transforms vulnerability into structural integrity. It is critical to understand that none of these phases are optional within this framework. They are not interchangeable, nor can they be bypassed without consequence. Each module introduces a necessary pressure that exposes weaknesses and forces adaptation. Without betrayal, the false self remains intact. Without discipline, potential remains unstructured. Without isolation, dependency persists. Without power, capacity remains untested. Without forgiveness, the system remains internally divided. The result is not merely growth, but integration, a state in which the individual operates as a coherent whole under varying conditions. This leads directly to the underlying structural principle. Failure is not an error in the system. It is a required component of its design. What is commonly labeled as failure, loss, delay, injustice, misrecognition, is, within this model, a form of targeted stress. It is applied precisely at the points where the individual's framework is weakest. The purpose is not to destroy, but to reveal and reinforce. From this perspective, adversity is not random. It is functionally aligned with development, even when it appears chaotic at the surface level. For the viewer or reader, this reclassification carries significant implications. Current difficulties, whether they manifest as uncertainty, rejection, stagnation, or pressure, can be reinterpreted not as meaningless disruption, but as raw material. They are inputs into a system that is actively shaping capacity. This does not romanticize suffering, nor does it deny its intensity. Instead, it assigns it a role. When hardship is seen as material rather than obstruction, the individual is no longer positioned as a passive recipient of events, but as an active processor of them. However, this shift in perception must be accompanied by a shift in behavior. Stoic application is not theoretical, it is procedural. It requires the deliberate practice of observation over reaction, creating a pause between stimulus and response in which judgment can be examined rather than automatically enacted. It demands discipline over complaint, redirecting energy from expression of frustration toward execution of action. These are not one-time decisions, but repeated operations that gradually reconfigure internal patterns. The objective of this process is the establishment of what can be defined as personal sovereignty. This is not independence in the external sense, but autonomy at the level of interpretation and response. A sovereign individual is not one who controls circumstances, but one who is not controlled by them. External volatility may persist, uncertainty, opposition, loss, but internal structure remains stable. Decisions are made from principle rather than impulse, from clarity rather than confusion. At this point, the architecture is complete, not because challenges cease, but because the system is now capable of absorbing them without disintegration. The individual no longer seeks to avoid pressure, but to utilize it. No longer seeks validation, but alignment. No longer reacts to chaos, but extracts structure from it. If this framework resonates, consider extending the engagement beyond passive consumption. Subscribe to the channel and follow for continued exploration of Stoic philosophy, psychological discipline, and structural thinking applied to modern challenges. Each subsequent analysis will build upon this foundation, offering further models and operational tools designed to strengthen internal architecture. The objective is not inspiration, but transformation, systematic, repeatable, and durable.